Hello and welcome to Bright Wings, children's books to make the heart soar. I am your host, Charity Hill. The purpose of this conversation is to help mothers and fathers identify books that will liberate their children to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. Friends, I'm delighted to share with you Stories for Strong Girls. It was one of the first book lists I ever created, a book list of good books for girls. As I considered what to say, I imagined what would I say to my own daughter. I imagined putting my hands on her shoulders and looking into her face, looking into her eyes. What do I want her to know and understand and believe about herself? What do I want her to feel about her body, about her abilities? What do I want my daughter to believe about the goodness of being a girl and of becoming a woman? Back in episode 8, Emily Sullivan and I discussed the question, where am I going and what good must I do? We talked about how fiction shapes our child's moral imagination. Stories allow our daughters to, in a sense, get inside and walk around inside the skin of another character. Because analogies are tied to realities, we can experience truth through fiction. We can experience truth by entering into the life of another character. And these characters are so important for our daughter's development, for their sense of what is possible for a girl, what is possible for me. Characters help our daughters to imagine, what am I capable of? What is it possible for me to choose? What does an excellent woman look like? What does a virtuous girl look like? What does courage look like? What does gentleness look like? What does intelligence, creativity, inventiveness, patience, perseverance, fidelity, endurance? What is it like? What does it look like when a girl is these things? Stories of strong girls and women show us that there is something distinctive about being a girl, about being a woman. Of course, across the board, I think it's important to recognize that good stories are just good stories. However, I want to propose that there is something distinctive about being a girl, and that good literature with strong female characters has something particular to offer to our daughters. Okay, I won't plunge too deep for too long, but I feel like I need to say something about what is a human being and what makes a girl a distinctive kind of human being. I think human nature is a paradox, and that paradox is best represented by understanding it as a gift. And I want to talk about how there are two aspects to this paradox. There are two aspects of understanding the human person in terms of gift. I would call the aspects of this gift receptivity and donativity, or donative. The characteristic of receptivity is what grounds human life. Without receptivity, there would be no donative quality. So human life is most characterized by receptivity. I did not make myself. I did not invent myself. I received my existence from another, from others. In the Genesis creation myth, we see Eve as a sign of the superabundance of this human status, that it is enough. In fact, more than enough that you are. In a very concrete example, I never found out during my pregnancies if I was expecting a son or a daughter because I wanted to live out this unconditional welcome, this status that each child is super abundantly enough in their being. Their being is a super abundant gift. So to me, they are a gift. To their father and to themselves, they are a gift. It is more than enough to be. Without this ongoing receptivity in the being of the creature, in the being of the son or the daughter, there would be no ability to take up that gift quality and then donate it. I think most of us are cool with the idea of being givers, of being donators, but I think sometimes we hear the word receptivity and we cringe. So let me say a little more. I just want to emphasize each person is a gift for their own sake. no strings attached, given to themselves. And yet they only realize this gift quality, the gift character that they are, by then re-gifting themselves, by becoming a gift, by becoming who they are more, by making a sincere gift of themselves. I mentioned in episode 1 that this is the point of parenting. This is the purpose of mothering and fathering, is to foster my child toward their destiny, to help my child take themselves in their hands, the gift that they are in their own hands, so that they can then enrich that gift through their own efforts and talents and creativity, and make that gift grow by giving it away, by making themselves a gift to the world, to others, to a spouse, to their community, to their children. It is my argument that what makes girls and women distinctive is, and this is a case of relative emphasis, but what makes us distinctive is the receptive quality of being, that we stand to emphasize that it is enough that you are a gift before you do anything, and all of your doing does not add to your dignity, but only flows out of the original gift. All right, friends, don't run away, because I really am trying to say something nuanced. I am not saying that women are only on the side of receptivity. I'm saying there's a relative emphasis in women and girls, that is what is distinctive about the feminine. As I see it, the feminine is a witness to all of humanity that persons are not made for use, but made for love. That's one of the extrapolations of this notion of the receptivity and gift character. The fact that girls and women are beautiful emphasizes this, emphasizes that it is enough that you are, you human, that you are a gift just in receiving your existence. Beauty in the first place isn't useful, and that is a compliment. Your dignity is not tied up in performance, in what you can do, as we said. And feminine beauty highlights this for all of us. It's not ornamental, it's existential. You are in your being a gift. Of course, this is also true of men, but women give this a particular prominence. Perhaps you can see a nugget of this truth in that both men and women look at women in advertisements. They look to women. The quote-unquote useless beauty of a woman emphasizes the personal, the relational. And I would call this emphasis, this prominence that women give, to be a kind of feminine genius. I think it's reasonable to argue that this feminine genius or feminine superpower is a way that girls and women have of paying attention to persons, of acknowledging the personhood of others, of treating persons like persons rather than perhaps objects or means to an end. We tend to side with the small, the weak, the vulnerable. Femininity tends to see persons as persons rather than see them according to systems, ideologies, or politics. This ability to pay attention to another person and acknowledge their human dignity shows up in biology, neurology, and psychology. We see even in infancy that girls are more interested in faces than objects. Now, my friends, I would be an idiot if I didn't admit that this is certainly a case in which our superpower is right next to our greatest wound. But it doesn't cease being a superpower for all that. I think because of these gifts to women is particularly given the task of pointing out to all of humanity the importance of relationships. Girls and women say, remember, relationships. Remember, love is the point of life. Not power or acquisition or amassing of whatever wealth. So as we move on to talk about stories for strong girls, I think it's important to say that strength is not simply like something on a girl power t-shirt. In fact, those kind of bug me. I'm not interested in literature about girls acquiring jobs or characteristics that used to belong to boys, or at least allegedly belonged to boys. Our identities can't be conceived in terms of power or a power struggle, wrenching away the characteristics of someone else to build you up. I think it's really damaging to ourselves and to our children to see the relationship between men and women, between femininity and masculinity as a kind of power struggle. That's not good for boys or girls. And I really want to reject a power-driven anthropology. Books like The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch, I find books like that to be kind of fake girl power propaganda. They're annoying because they fail as art. At this point in history, I feel like, of course, girls can do what boys can do in terms of work and jobs, etc., blah. What I'm interested in this podcast is not functional equivalency, but distinction. What makes girls distinctive? And where is the literature that represents what's distinctive about being a girl? So instead of offering you literature that shows how to wrest back your identity, I want to offer you literature that supports a purely positive understanding of the feminine. So strong girls are girls of virtue, but in a particular way, since stories that are stories that have plot, are stories about a confrontation a character has with a problem and their response to the problem. The strength that I see in all of these characters that I'm going to talk about is a strength that comes from courage, no matter what virtue is being called forth in the character. Why courage? Well, this rocking quote from C.S. Lewis is going to help us. He says, "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality." What this podcast is about is that I am proposing literature that looks at an excellent girl and shows us, shows me, shows you, shows our children what a girl who is excellent looks like. Or a girl who is struggling towards excellence under burdens or hardships. What do such girls look like? How do they act? Do girls have a particular genius in affirming what is human? Do they have a particular genius that shapes the way they take action? A genius that defines the terms of the character's success? When does a female character feel like she's achieved her goal? Do girls have a genius for the personal and the human? And conversely, does the community play a larger role in a female character's development? This is so exciting. Let's talk about books now, starting with some picture books. So I love spunky female characters. Surprise, surprise. And so I'll share a few picture book suggestions with you first. If you have an appreciation for Madeline, the red-headed, confident, decisive, and leadership-driven young lady from Paris, the young lady who lived in the house all covered in vines with 11 other girls in 2 straight lines, that Madeline, the one by Ludwig Bemelmans. If you enjoy her, you are also likely to enjoy a young lady named Katie Morag, a character created by Mary Hedderwick. Katie Morag is a Scottish lass with, as you might have guessed, red hair. She lives on an island called Struy with a wonderful cast of characters. There's so much local color. There is a map of her island. And all of the persons on her island are just bristling with personality. I love Katie because she lives with intensity. There's nothing half-hearted about her. She's a decisive girl, and we love her adventures and misadventures. And we always learn from her decision-making. She lives with her parents, who run the post office and shop on the Isle of Struy. They live in their apartment up above the shop and post office. Katie has a couple of siblings, and she has 2 grannies. One who lives on the mainland, who's a bit prissy, and one who lives on the island, who's a bit gritty. They both love her, each of them in a special way, and she's paid attention to and helped to grow by each of them as well. This next character was stirred with a lot of piquant sauce. Her name is Feliciana Phaedra Leroux, and she's a character created by Tenia Thomasy. It's about a strong girl from a big family full of cousins and grandparents and aunts and uncles. It's a story about Cajun culture and language, served up with a Cajun glossary and pronunciation guide at the front of the book. It opens with, "Now let me tell you something about Feliciana Phaedra. She was the tail end of the Leroux crew, just like Grandpa Baby was before he grew up to be the oldest Leroux. Maybe that's why they were tied special together. Of all the grandchildren, and there were plenty, Feliciana Phaedra was Grandpa Baby's Tzitzywalla. Whoo, he spoiled her rotten." But despite being Grandpa Baby's favorite, he refuses to take Feliciana Phaedra out alligator hunting with all the boy cousins. We see by the end of the story how Feliciana makes her own decision about that. In both Feliciana Phaedra LaRue and Katie Morag, the illustrations in these stories are just bursting with the vivacity of the characters in them. I like that these girls have a lot of personality, they're decisive about the good or the bad, and they learn from their mistakes. One of our current favorite picture books right now is called The Bravest Woman in America by Marissa Moss and illustrated by Andrea Uren. It's the story of Ida Lewis, who was the lighthouse keeper of Lime Rock Lighthouse in Newport, Rhode Island. We hear how she loves the sea and how she learns lighthouse keeping work from her father, how he teaches her to row, how strong she grows as she becomes an expert rower. She watches the sea for any kind of trouble, and then, sure enough, she becomes a great rescuer. In her life, she saved between 18 and 25 people from drowning off the point of her lighthouse. She was described as the bravest woman in America by Harper's Weekly, the New York Tribune, and Putnam's Magazine. And she was one of the first women to receive the American Cross of Honor soon after it was created in 1907. The illustrations are beautiful with just wonderful, energetic depictions of the sea, beautiful light and movement. Her great concern for human life led her to remark, "Anyone who thinks it is unfeminine to save lives has the brains of a donkey." This story concerns her ascent to be the keeper of the lighthouse and her first life-saving rescue. It's easy to infer from the text that saving lives is feminine. And in fact, she was supported in this by both her father and her mother. There are just so many very good books on this book list for this episode. I'm trying to zero in on which ones to share with you. I want to tell you about a story called Miss Bridie Chose a Shovel by Leslie Connor and Mary Azarian as the illustrator. Sadly, this story is not available on my bookshop.org book list. It's only available, as far as I know, through Amazon and through other used booksellers. It tells the story of Bridie, and I assume she's leaving Ireland. It opens with, "She could have picked a chiming clock or a porcelain figurine, but Miss Bridie chose a shovel back in 1856. It tells the story of how Bridie took the family's shovel when she immigrated to America and the beautiful life that she shaped for herself with her shovel. In every scene, the shovel is participating in some way in the shaping of Bridie's life. The shovel helps her to plant a garden and sell her plants to the ladies of New York. The shovel helps her to clear the snow away off the ice on the evening that she meets her husband skating. The shovel is there to pry the doctor's buggy from the mud when Miss Bridie's giving birth to her babies. The shovel is a symbol of Miss Bridie's not just practicality, but a sign of the great beauty that she brings to the world, the great fruitfulness that she brings to the world. So though Miss Bridie could have chosen a chiming clock or a porcelain figurine, the fact that she chose a shovel back in 1856 was a choice to dig deep, to plant deeply, to live deeply, and to produce great fruit. As we dive into middle grade fiction next, we see the feminine genius emerging with greater clarity. The feminine genius matures in the face of adversity. I think in a unique way, a way unique to being a girl and a woman, our older daughter is going to be asking the questions, who am I? Where have I come from? Where am I going? What good must I do? You will see in the stories I'm going to discuss how the female characters are really distinguished by their attunement to interdependence, to relationship, to friendship, and to community. And I don't think this is simply culturally conditioned. I think it stems from a girl's existential place, her place within reality, that because of this genius for receptivity, for pointing out the value of it is good that you are within all of human life, that she stands on the side of this in a particular way. We're going to see these female characters apply courage to these acts. You can see character development happen over time when you're reading a middle grade fiction work. And that's wonderful, but it's also really lovely to notice that there are nuanced ways of looking at strength, of noticing that the form of every virtue at its testing point is courage. Just let's briefly consider Marmee from Little Women, how perseveringly gentle and self-controlled she was with her daughters. Her restraint is a kind of courage. Courage for Small Things. Little Women is a wonderful book, a wonderful story for strong girls because it has 4 girls and 1 mother to consider, not counting the reliable Hannah, who's always the salt of the earth in that story. Gentle Beth is not a wimp. I mean, we see that her gentleness is really a strength of character, a commitment to kindness, to patience, to generosity, to service. And wonderfully, who she is and her gifts are so strongly appreciated by Mr. Lawrence. Meg, maybe even more than Amy, is sort of consumed with vanity. She wants an easy, comfortable, pretty life. She's not too interested in going out and doing great things. She just wants a beautiful life, a comfortable life. She wouldn't mind being rich, but what she wants is to not have to work as a governess anymore. By the end, her character has really grown because she's married a poorer man, a good man, a man of virtue, but not a man of wealth or means. And she chooses him, his personhood. And this choice then shapes her. She learns how to sacrifice willingly. She gives up her vanity for some clothes and for socializing at a particular level and wearing a particular style. She learns to be more genuinely sacrificial, genuinely generous at the service of others. She perseveres in her unity with her husband, and together I think they rise in success in the world. But she becomes a larger and more interesting character because of this development. As I reread Little Women for the first time in a while as an adult woman, I was struck by Amy in a way I'd never been struck before. When I read her as a girl, I didn't like her. Or maybe, well, I kind of didn't like her. And at the same time, I was totally sympathetic to her because I also was one of the little sisters in my family. And I felt like Amy was misunderstood and not given enough attention. But I saw Amy this time as someone who grew into being not the vain, snobbish, artistic sister who ended up getting way more than she deserved. But I was able to see how Amy was a strong character, grew into a much stronger character than the little girl that we first meet in the opening pages. Do you remember that part where Amy and Joe go out making calls? They were returning social visits, and they were going around and calling on all the people that they should be attentive to calling on. We're tempted to think it's just this useless social form, but it's really a form of attentiveness, a form of kindness, a form of paying attention that Amy was engaging in. Returning these visits was more important at that point in history than returning phone calls is for us now. And it says that she did it because she genuinely cared about people and she liked to, as the book says, do what she could to please them. And Amy has dragged Joe along with her on all these calls. At the end of the round of visiting, Joe skips out on a visit to Aunt Josephine. And because of this generosity shown by Amy and lack of generosity to others and attentiveness to others that Joe has lacked, Aunt Josephine takes Amy to Europe instead of Joe. Jo March, the usual favorite amongst the readership, right? She's such a strong personality, but she doesn't yet, at the beginning of the book, have a very strong character. That is, her character is not very well under control. It's a bit sprayed around. We love her because she has such a robust personality, but it takes the whole book for her to really become more integrated, to be able to hold herself and her gifts in her hands in a way that is sure and secure so that she can then give those gifts to the world through her writing and then I think through her marriage. A book that has been said to be so similar to Little Women is a book called The Penderwicks by Jeannie Birdsall. Similar to the March sisters, there are 4 Penderwick sisters, and they are missing their mother rather than their father. In fact, their mother has passed. These sisters do a wonderful job of showing our daughters what it's like to be a sister, how to be a good sister, in some cases, how to be a not-so-good sister. Each of the Penderwick sisters is distinctive. Each of them has strengths, and each of them has areas of needed growth. Each of them is distinctive, sometimes a bit quirky even, but they rely on each other, and they try to act in a unified way as a group of sisters. These books are really good at showing my daughters how good it is to be a sister, the positivity of being a sister, and they also show the positivity of being a distinct character within that group. The next story I want to talk to you about is called The Secret Keepers by the great Trenton Lee Stewart. Interestingly, the main protagonist is actually a boy named Reuben. But I wonder what would have become of Reuben if it weren't for the amazing women in this book. In this podcast, we like to propose truth, goodness, and beauty, and Trenton Lee Stewart, the author, has a particular love for truth that I really value. There's so much that's amazing about this story. It deserves its own review, and I'm going to try to do that. But for now, suffice it to say that the protagonist, Reuben, is toying with a kind of falsification for a long time in this story. It's quite harrowing, actually. You wonder what he's going to really choose in the end. But Stewart gives us these strong women in the story. There's Penny, who's a young girl who's just such kindness and grit. And she just simply can't tell a lie, can't fake anything. Not afraid of anything either. Quite remarkably, she and her family have spent their entire family history preparing for a moment in which the family is sure that their commitment to good will be tested. And Penny, let me tell you, is up for the challenge. She's ready. She's been preparing her whole life. And in fact, her whole family's history has been preparing for what comes at the climax of the book. Even Reuben's mother, who in the opening pages seems quite weak, quite worn down, quite downtrodden, caring but careworn. She loves Reuben, but she is being worn thin, worn clear right out. By the end of the story, you see what a woman is capable of, what love can do. His small, thin, kind, but very fear-controlled mother does something extraordinary at the end. There's a woman, Miss Genevieve, who risks her life against evil. It's through their keen attention to persons, to Reuben namely, that these ladies are able to act with great courage. And it's also clear that within themselves, they have a great commitment to goodness, which they are unwilling to compromise. Next, I want to highlight the tale, The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale, as a story for strong girls. This novel is based on the fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. The original is a thin tale, small, a little obscure. In the original tale, the motivations of the characters are very unclear. Shannon Hale's telling of it brings to light the moral and ethical possibilities in the characters with so much creativity while remaining so true to the original skeleton of the story. Princess Onodori, whose name has been shortened to Ani for most people, is the crown princess of Kildare. Though she spends years being educated and formed to become queen of Kildare, her mother barters her away to become the wife of the crown prince of the neighboring land, Bayern. Her mother does this in a strategic move to prevent war between Kildare and Bayern. Her mother is a woman of power, with great powers of persuasion. Ani, on the other hand, has been taught by her aunt, and has the gift of speaking to birds, particularly, and also to her horse, Falada. But Ani is keenly lacking in the ability to connect with and speak to people. As a reader, we can see that she is wounded by her mother's lack of attention and care and tenderness, and this has also contributed to Ani's lack of confidence and, ironically, her inability to become queen. Ani is sweet and likable, but too compliant. As a reader, we're sympathetic to her. My children were sympathetic to Ani, but at the same time wanted her to be braver, wanted her to stand up for herself to her mother. But she thinks that she cannot, and so she doesn't. She agrees to become the wife of the crown prince of Bayern, and she travels with her guards and her serving maid until they are met with a rebellion from within on their travels to Bayern. It is only in escaping with her life that Ani begins to live. Finally, when she's pushed to her utmost, she begins to act with responsibility for her own life. She finds a job tending the king of Bayern's geese, and she begins to make friends with the other young people who care for the king's livestock. She becomes capable of work, of accomplishing tasks, and she becomes proud that she has skills. She's proud that she can bear responsibilities, and she becomes more who she is by being able to trust the other young people. She becomes friends with them and begins to discover her worth. In suffering the massive discomforts of her new, rough life, she becomes aware and conscious of how she had overlooked the sacrifices and the services of so many in her life while she was still a princess. Ani's woman-in-waiting, Celia, has gone to the king of Bayern and presented herself as the crown princess of Kildare. She's presented herself as Ani, supported and protected by the murderous band of men that led the rebellion in the forest. Celia, who has great powers of persuasion, in fact, her power is kind of a magical one called people speaking, has taken over Ani's life. Her goal was to take over Ani's life and to live it better than Ani. What is so stunning about Shannon Hale's Goose Girl is the way the character Anidori grows throughout the book. We like her, but we don't respect her, perhaps, in the beginning of the story. By the end, she has become deeply mature, strong, self-controlled. She seeks out her true place as Bayern's queen-to-be, not because she loves the prince. She, in fact, doesn't care too much for the young man she understands to be the prince. But she has fallen in love with the people of Bayern through her friendships with the other animal workers. She has seen the needs on the streets, and she knows that she is responsible for helping to solve the problems of injustice that she sees. She's also aware that she is responsible for the lives of the people in Kildare. So Ani seeks to oust her supplanter, not for selfish motives, in fact, but for extremely generous ones, for really heroic motives. It's a very powerful book. I'd recommend it for 10 and up, although I admit I let my 7-year-olds listen to the audio version. It does have its moments of fairy tale darkness. But the book was so powerful that even when we weren't listening to the audio, I would look over at my children and they'd be quiet and doing some task. And I would say, "Are you thinking about the book?" And they would look at me like I had read their minds. And I'm like, yes, Mama, I can't stop thinking about it. I like that Ani grows. She doesn't grow into an entirely different person. The growth that she goes through is growth that's coherent with her personality. It's congruent with her personality. So I love showing my children that character development. This next series has my heart entirely, and that is the Green Ember series by S.D. Smith. All the female characters in this series are remarkable. Every single one of them is a strong female character. They are children, they are old women, they are healers, they are warriors. They are wonderful characters. I just realized that I don't think there are any female villains in the Green Ember series, but to me that doesn't matter. All the female characters have a personal depth. There's nuances in their motivations and in their thinking. S.D. Smith does not write flat characters. In fact, his female characters provide a great argument that it's not evil or darkness that makes a character interesting or appealing or moving. The Green Ember opens with Heather Longtreader and her brother Pickett, and they are just two ordinary... Did I mention yet that they're rabbits? I always forget they're rabbits. Two ordinary young rabbits who discover that the story of their lives is inextricably bound up with the danger and drama of a broken world. They are beset with peril and betrayal on every side, and yet they are also surrounded by goodness and fidelity. They're surrounded by care and self-sacrifice. And they and their friends are confronted with the reality that if the world is to be mended, then it needs their contribution. In fact, it might need their total gift of self. It's one of the most achingly beautiful stories I have read since C.S. Lewis. And I raise my right hand and promise you that the female characters in this book are 100% worthy of your precious children. Well, I have been so pleased to share with you some of my very favorite books for our daughters. Thank you for considering what makes a girl distinctive. And thank you for considering what role literature may play in supporting her in all of her possibilities. As C.S. Lewis said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Let us prepare our daughters for this testing point by giving them stories of strength. I invite you to explore the very personal book list that I assembled for this episode. You can find it in the show notes or on the website. I hope you find in it treasures to support you in parenting your daughters toward their destiny. And in fact, your sons as well. We all need to be shaped by the feminine genius.